First of all, thank you ever so much for coming and giving up some of your evening for this on in Safeguarding Adult Week. It is something that we feel really passionately about, and I'll say a bit more about Safeguarding Adult Reviews, and then I'll tell you a bit about Harvey. So I'm an independent social worker. I've written quite a few SARs, albeit not with the benefit of a Kent pen. I've written a few domestic homicide reviews now slightly changed for Kent and Medway. I'm an independent safeguarding chair for Dimensions UK, which is a not-for-profit organisation for people with learning disabilities and autism. Now, reviews are about learning from what went wrong, but more importantly, and I think we don't take this on board enough, it's what went right. And I have done a few reviews recently where more went right than went wrong, and it's a really good exercise to put that down in a review, because I think we all learn better from good practice than we do from practice that wasn't so good. Now, I've done quite a few reviews for Kent and Medway. I've done a few for other places as well. I've put down here Kent and Medway are good at reviews and do a lot of them. Some areas try not to do reviews, partly because they take a while, partly because they're a bit kind of, they can embarrass if you get some bad practice in public. So some areas go out of their way not to do reviews. Kent and Medway do a lot of reviews, and that really is good. I do find that Kent and Medway are very transparent and actually do look for what can be done better. So, I mean, hats off from me as an independent person to Kent and Medway. Now, when we're doing reviews, and I will say a bit more about the process, it's easy to see what went wrong with hindsight, because we're spending time looking at what went wrong, and as I say, what went right. And when we're looking with multi-agency colleagues, it does give some very rich learning, because it's that opportunity to sit alongside people and see what agency did which bit of practice when, how that worked well and how that didn't go so well. And I always think it's a real privilege to do what I do with these reviews and look with hindsight at what happened, and with the benefit of time to look at what happened. And I do know that if you're working as a frontline healthcare worker, social worker, police officer, fire service officer, whatever, you've got the immediate pressures of day-to-day work, and you don't always have the opportunity to step back and think what might have been different. In reviews, we do have that, and that does feel like a luxury. Above all, though, I mean, it's a privilege to look at someone's life and learn what happened. And when I do reviews, I always try, if I can, to speak to someone who knew them, so that they tell me a bit about that person, and I can learn what the person was like and put some of that in the review. And my final comment here on this slide is, with the time invested, as I say, Kent are good at this, positive change must come from reviews. And every review will have some recommendations. It's actually Neve's job to do the action planning from that. And Kent are very good at holding agencies to account for making the changes that come from reviews. So when we do a review, things happen and things change, and practice improves. Thanks, Neve. Next slide. So why do a review? Because we have to, and I'll say a bit more about that, but also because we want to, and I've said where Kent are coming from on that. And we have to when an adult in the area dies as a result of abuse or neglect, which is either known or suspected, and there's a concern that partner agencies could have worked more effectively to protect the adult, and that's from the 2014 Care Act. So there's an important multi-agency bit there. If at the commissioning stage, what may have gone wrong is one agency, then it won't be a safeguarding adult review. It'll be a safeguarding adult review where more than one agency is involved. So we can also do discretionary safeguarding adult reviews where it doesn't meet the legal threshold. but there is learning to be obtained, and I have done a few discretionary reviews for Kent, and that's because we want to bit, and we also want to because we can get the learning and make the system improvements that help people. Next slide, please. So the review process, this is how reviews happen. Anybody from any agency can put in a request for a safeguarding adult review. When I say anybody from any agency, there is a process within the agency, so it needs to be agreed and signed off within the agency. So any agency can ask for a safeguarding adult review. There's then a group meets under the safeguarding board and has a look at whether the criteria is met for a safeguarding review, or whether it's a good one to do a discretionary review. So there'll be a discussion, and then if the decision is that the threshold is met or a discretionary review is going to be commissioned, then Kent will find an independent chair, somebody like me, and there are a few of us. I've put down family engagement because, as I've said, it's really important to find out about the person, and I like to put quite a lot about the person if I can in the review. You don't always know about the history of someone, but where we can, I do put that in. There is then a core group, so that's a group of managers who will meet throughout the process of the safeguarding adult review, and I find that really useful. What I tend to do is write the terms of reference, the next bit on the list here. So where something's happened, we will, and I'll draft this bit, say, I think for this review we'll look at these particular points of what may have gone wrong, what may have gone right. So we'll draft the terms of reference. Then the core group is really helpful throughout the process because I can bounce ideas off them. They will look at a first draft. They will help form the recommendations. There are a range of methods for safeguarding adult reviews. They don't all have to be long. We try and do them all within 6 months, and most of them are done, I think, within 6 months. But some can be day reviews where a group of practitioners will meet together. Some will be a desktop review, just to review the information that we have without meeting. Some will be full-blown, where internal management reviews are written by each agency, and there's a whole lot of information. So there's different methods. I will then, or another chair will then draft an overview report, together with recommendations and an action plan. There is then a process whereby that report is read and agreed by the board, and the board may come back with comments. Andy, who introduced this session, reads all the reports, and sometimes does come back with some very helpful comments. So there's a whole process whereby the report is agreed, and then it's published. Usually, there might be occasions where a review isn't published if it's particularly sensitive, if someone is particularly identifiable, but the aim is to publish. And I would say that all reports are anonymised, and the report I'm going to talk about, Harvey, that's not his real name. And they're anonymised for obvious reasons, really, which is so that it keeps that person out of the public domain. And we try to ensure as far as we can that you don't find them by Googling. So that they are as anonymised as possible. Next slide, please. So, safeguarding adult review, Harvey. Harvey was a white British man who was aged 46 when he died at his home. The coroner ruled that he died from severe alcoholic liver disease and ketoacidosis. He was known to have alcoholism and suicidal ideation since 2015. That's what the agencies had known, but I have a sense it was longer. And I did talk to his sister, and she talked about it being a longer history. But as far as agencies were aware, 2015. And one of the issues in this one, in this safeguarding adult review, is that he was transient. And I've said a bit because he moved between Kent and London. And actually, I don't think that's very transient, because lots of people do move around a bit. But it did mean that there was a disconnect between the services that he used, and at various times people didn't know where he was. So yes, he was transient, and yes, the transfers were quite difficult, and things like there was an alcohol relapse team working with him in London. He then moved to Kent but didn't have an address, so the London team maintained the record but didn't actually see him because they hadn't got anyone to transfer to. So yeah, he was transient, but actually not very transient, and not as transient as some people are. Next slide, please. So I talked a bit about why safeguarding adult reviews are commissioned, and for this one, following Harvey's death, it was thought that agencies could have done more to support him. And he was known to self-neglect. So question, was the self-neglect policy used? He had mental ill health and substance misuse disorder. And there is a protocol that I know you will know about, which is the Joint Working Protocol for Co-occurring Mental Health and Substance Misuse Disorders, which is a great piece of work. And I've referred to it quite a lot in my reviews, and I'm finding now that most people do know about it. When it was first around, not so many people knew about it, but it's good guidance about how to work with people who have got mental ill health and substance misuse. So a great policy to use. We wanted to know, were the reasons for Harvey's significant decline in 2022 understood? And was his frequent attendance at hospital understood? Why was he attending hospital quite so much? And then, given his alcohol dependency, were the capacity assessments that were undertaken reliable? So next slide. So I mentioned the terms of reference. That's what we looked at in the Safeguarding Adult Review. And I'm going to be fairly brief in this presentation, but if you want to look at Harvey, it's on the website, and there will be a lot more information in the review. Next slide, please, Neve. So what was life like for him? He'd had numerous hospital admissions between 2015 and 2021. He'd been offered alcohol detox and had relapsed. In February 22, he moved to Kent. And as I mentioned, he was still supported by the London homeless team, and he didn't have an address in Kent, so there was no transfer done. The people who knew him in London, didn't have anyone to pass their knowledge on to in Kent. By December 22, Harvey had been admitted to hospital 18 times in the previous 12 months. He'd had poor physical and mental health and difficult home conditions. And one of the things that was quite striking was that when he attended hospital, and he was normally brought in by ambulance, there was no real record of the number of times he'd been to hospital. So each of the 18 times, he was treated as a standalone admission. And there's more around that, which I can talk about in a minute. He was anxious and suicidal. He didn't have a GP, and that's a really important point, because you'll probably know that when anyone is discharged from hospital, there's an EDN, electronic discharge notification, and that will say, so-and-so was in hospital, this is what happened, this is what we recommend the follow-up in the community should be. But because he didn't have a GP, then there was no one to send those electronic discharge notifications to. So it meant that there was no follow-up in the community. And I guess one of the really important things from this is about, where possible, encourage people to get a GP. And I'll say a bit more about that because it's a recommendation. So social care were trying to see him, but they weren't able to make contact with him. The Christmas period intervened. I mentioned that by December 22, he'd been in hospital 18 times. Social care were trying to see him because they wanted to do a Care Act assessment. Sometime probably over the Christmas period, he died, and he was found dead at home on the 3rd of January 2023. Next slide, please. So good practice. He had had a good assessment in London, albeit he'd relapsed, and there was a lot of information in London, but they hadn't got a contact to send it to in Kent. CCAM, in my experience, CCAM is South East Coast Ambulance Service, are really good at identifying vulnerable people, and they'd raised a vulnerable adult referral. Kent Police also sent an adult protection referral to adult social care. And that's one where they had asked Harvey's permission because they were concerned about him. Harvey didn't consent to it, but the police judged that they could override his wishes for safeguarding reasons. So both CCAM and Kent Police, good practice from them. Next slide, please. So the recommendations. Members of the SAB, the Safeguarding Adult Board, to ensure that the planned high-intensity use project is introduced across sites to understand people's needs. Now, high-intensity use project is for people who go to hospital a lot. And gosh, before this, I should have checked the number of attendances at hospital. Can't remember it. Someone on the call might know. But 18 times in 12 months is huge. And under the new high intensity use project, Harvey would have met the criteria. So that would have meant it would have triggered a meeting, and people could have looked at Harvey, his health, why he was there, his loneliness, social isolation, together with physical and mental health. So the high intensity use project is something that was being rolled out at the time I wrote the review. I don't know, because I haven't heard where it's got to, but it was in its sort of near final stages for rolling out. It's a really important one, because if people attend hospital as much as Harvey did, there have to be reasons for it, and they really do need to be supported in a very different way. Second recommendation, that capacity assessments ensure that at least one assessment ensures best practice for alcohol dependent people. And I'm sure you'll know that alcohol can affect executive capacity. So mental capacity, people might say that they can do things and say that they will do things, but with executive capacity, they may not actually be able to do it. And executive capacity can be particularly influenced by alcohol. So the recommendations linked to developing best practice with co-occurring conditions. So one assessment at least should be more in depth. Now, we asked, when I was doing the review, we asked NHS England to provide advice on GP registrations and what happens if there's no GP. NHS England sent some advice, which I've included in the review. In theory, I think electronic discharge notifications can be sent to third parties, so could be sent to a community nurse, could be sent to a pharmacy. In practice, I'm not quite sure how that would happen, because how would a hospital know to do it? What I would urge is that if you are working with someone who hasn't got a GP, do everything that you can to get them a GP. And in this instance, people had actually tried quite hard with Harvey and gone down to the local surgery and helped him fill in the forms. And I didn't understand when I was doing this why he hadn't got a GP, but he didn't have a GP who was registered to him. So there is something about try and work with someone on fathoming the system, making sure that they've got a GP. Don't let go until you know they've got a GP, and then there is at least somewhere for the electronic discharge notifications to go to and someone to coordinate their care in the community. Is there a final recommendation on the next slide, Neve. Yep. And it's the one I mentioned, agencies to clarify the interface, or sort of the one I mentioned, agencies to clarify the interface between the Mental Capacity Act and the Mental Health Act. And Harvey, both could have applied to Harvey at different times. Sometimes he was capacitous, sometimes he wasn't. Sometimes the Mental Health Act could have been applied, and he might have, in fact, he had been hospitalised, albeit outside the timeline of this review. So it's the bit about legal literacy. It's for practitioners to work and understand when to use the right bit of legislation at the right time as people change and as their capability, capacity, comorbidities might change. It's getting the legislation right and pointing them and working with them to go in the right direction.